welcome to another edition of the MSDW Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. This time it's another week in review. We preview Microsoft's involvement at Summit EMEA, including their digital transformation message. We'll run through some expert opinions about Dynamics documentation. We'll look at how to make sense of Cortana Intelligence Suite and Azure IoT, including a very interesting use case for effective selling. A couple of compelling use cases for an implementation being put back on the rails, Dynamics CRM for police response, and more. Joining me to chat about the week in the news is Dan Morneau, assistant editor. Dan, hi, what do we have first?
Well, first we have three expert guest articles, and the first is from Mark Polino, Director of Client Services at FastPath, with the provocative title, "The User Manual is Dead, Long Live the User Manual."
This was easily the most commented on piece of the last week from Mark Polino, Microsoft MVP and Director of Client Services at FastPath, as you said. And he made a pretty straightforward case in not too many words about the need for the GP team to basically up its game with documentation. As the product has moved along, I think maybe it has lacked an overall sort of control or management of its documentation strategy. And I think what he was more or less telling them to get their act together. I thought it was an interesting piece. I didn't expect quite as many responses as it got. There are a lot of other people who I think share his opinion. They want to see a comprehensive documentation model for GP, whether it's moving to all online or whether it's maintaining the sort of paper/PDF published documents in a more sort of systematic way so that they're reasonably easy to find no matter what version of the product you have. I guess right now it is a bit of a mess, and I don't think that reflects particularly well for the product. So I haven't heard anything from Microsoft, but I'm guessing they heard that. They tend to hear what Mark has to say, and I think he knows that too.
Yeah, it's Mark's always a pleasure. It's like somebody dropped bread and the seagulls descend. There's always a ton of reaction to his pieces.
Yeah, he manages to put his finger on the pulse of what other folks in the GP space are thinking. And Mark doesn't spend all his time in that realm anymore in his work at FastPath. I know he has a broader scope now, but he still pays pretty close attention to what's going on with GP. If I would add my commentary, I would say it's a little concerning that the documentation has fallen back the way it has. I don't know if it's just something where they lost sight of it or people just aren't understanding what their approach is, or whether it's really more of an issue in terms of a lack of resources, which I think is one of the big concerns for GP these days, is are they going to get the support that they need to keep the product really healthy, and that includes documentation and bug fixing and all those other blocking and tackling types of things that you need for a successful software product, right?
Yeah, I used to be a director of documentation for the ERP company that I worked with, Lilly Software, and one thing was true, and I tried to impress this upon the product manager was, listen, this afterthought, it's got to be the forethought, because if there is absolutely, if people get into this, by the time they phone you, they're annoyed. And, that is the last thing you want. And so, yeah, we've got to modernize the documentation, which we did. And we've got to put it in line so that they don't leave the screen, which we did. And simply put, no, they don't want to book anymore. So they don't want FUDware. So.
Yeah, and thinking back, I know that the different Dynamics products and just like any software, enterprise software solution, it goes through iterations of who's managing the documentation, who's overseeing it, what mechanisms they're using to actually write it and publish it. I'd be amazed if they kept doing the PDF versions of the documents and didn't make the decision to go to an all-online approach. Mark made the point that there's a lot of knowledge in blog posts right now, which isn't that far a step from putting them into, say, a wiki format, which really does support a lot of what you need for modern documentation in terms of the ability to create and organize the content by version, sort of creating a taxonomy scheme and doing, version management of some kind, maybe cruder than with a true document management solution or enterprise content management solution. But, I think it's worth continuing to watch and see how Microsoft responds and what people think going forward. Because I think, veterans of the product, they want to see that the company can still keep the lights on, if you will, keep these elements of the product healthy.
Sure. Next up is Cortana Intelligence Suite, How Manufacturers Can Evaluate the Business Potential. This is by Melissa Templeton, who's a senior functional consultant with Sikich.
Yeah, so this was Melissa's first article for us, and it was great to work with her on her first contribution. I think we should be seeing a few more pieces related to this topic on maybe diving into some of the specific components of the Cortana Intelligence Suite. So she really shared she went, I think she took a Microsoft-led course or seminar on Cortana Intelligence Suite and its products, and then sort of made sense of the whole range of different offerings that are there, what they do, and how to sort of make sense of them and why they would be valuable in a manufacturing environment. And I'm not going to run through all the sections of the piece. It's really worth reading, because if you aren't really familiar with it, this is a great place to start. But there's so many different components, and you get a sense of how Microsoft is approaching the challenge of data management in the cloud and analytics in the cloud by first taking a sort of a summary view of all the different elements there.
Next up was Sales Effectiveness in Microsoft Dynamics CRM with Azure IoT and Machine Learning. This was by Stefano Tempesta, VP of Engineering with EF Education First.
Right, so this was a new piece by Stefano, and if you don't know him already, really worth getting to know him and his writing and the kind of presentations he does. He's really building quite a reputation for himself, I think, as a forward-thinking Dynamics CRM, technical lead at his company, EF Education First. He did a really amazing webcast for us about a model for doing kind of using IoT for sort of emergency management. And here he dives into sales effectiveness in the sense of what you can do to classify consumers, kind of gain an edge by using Azure IoT Hub and Azure Machine Learning to basically do a lot of the heavy lifting that a sales team would do and allow them to focus on the things that you really do need a salesperson for, and leaving some of the other tasks for what machine learning and cloud computing resources can do. So again, he's doing a great job of sort of setting a vision here of what some of the and he also goes into specifics. So, I mean, if you're looking for code, he also has code in terms of how he actually built some of the components that can do some of the things he's describing. So it's not just vision statement, it's some actual examples. I don't know if any of it's production ready in what he describes here, but I think we'll be hearing more from Stefano. So, I think he's got one of those kind of key voices where he takes these vision ideas that the software vendor puts forward, and he starts putting them into reality, right?
Yeah, and it was really actually quite a compelling use case. It was, I think the best description of it was, so you've got sophisticated, really intensive customer profiles based on what they have input, based on what you've gathered from Azure IoT, and in this case it was for, say, cosmetics. What does a high-end cosmetics, what does this individual usually purchase? Where is this individual? What do the vendors in this particular area need to stock in order to serve this individual and hundreds of other individuals? So it's a very, very sort of a sophisticated, targeted use case that to me it was amazing. I was reading this thing. Wow.
And like I was saying, I mean, it's those components where like a person really can't do some of those things by just looking at a spreadsheet or something like that of the data. So it's really using the strengths of people versus using the strengths of computing environment.
Yeah.
Which is exactly where that line sort of lives. I think there is that line, and IT managers or development managers who can sort of put the right parts on the right sides of that boundary are going to build really cool systems, I think.
Yeah. Next up are two very interesting implementation stories. The first was how managing scope brings a Microsoft Dynamics NAV plus CRM implementation back to life. And this was a story out of Canada, actually, with a company called Precision Gutters. This was a NAV and CRM implementation, of course, and after a year of waiting for NAV to go live, the owner got fed up and called Catapult. Now, Catapult did what it calls a lean deployment, which is a highly project management-based approach using the classic waterfall approach, and their CEO, Elliot Fishman, who we talked to for the piece, pointed out that people have a lot of business pain always when they're looking to deploy a solution like NAV, and they kind of expect it to be solved all at once, which may or may not be realistic. What winds up happening is that it doesn't get implemented at all, as was happening in this case. And Fishman described how when they deploy something that's right sized to an immediate need and they stay focused on getting up and running and operational, then when that is done, they can step back and say, all right, what's the next most important priority? Now, for this company, a lot of their business pain was in financials, which had to do with inventory, which had to do with invoicing. And here they were, again, a year into this implementation, finding that they were still working with their access based old system. They were still putting in there till midnight. They were just not getting things done. So in came Catapult and carved out this doable scope. And CRM apparently had been done first, and that was running decently, but customer relations and field service, again, was not their greatest pain. So, more or less, in came Catapult and they turned this implementation end on end, said, no, 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 NAV's got to come first, CRM we'll figure out later. So that was a pretty compelling story. And these folks, Catapult actually got this company up and running on NAV in 3 months. And I think that's pretty
Yeah,
impressive.
one of the things that jumped out at me on this one, and I really did like this story too, was this almost sort of a philosophical, you know, conundrum of when I read that they described it as a waterfall approach because to me this it sounds more like an agile approach in the large scale because they took a chunk of the work and then they went to get that chunk done. I'm sure someone who's more of an agile expert could tell me I'm wrong, but sort of taking, like you said, a 3 month chunk, which I know is not particularly agile, but showing some progress, iterating on that, and aiming for that minimum viable product before you move forward. Now, if they were doing a waterfall approach within that, maybe we should talk to the folks at Catapult to get a little better understanding. But it makes perfect sense. What's the minimum nav capabilities you need to be able to launch it and get it out there, get the users on it, and do it in a pretty short amount of time. Yeah, 3 months is short. And my guess was they started with a system that was sort of sitting there doing nothing on a test server somewhere with a lot of very frustrated people around it. And you hear, I guess the other thought I had was you hear this fairly often. I do like these stories that are sort of the rescue stories. I think it happens a lot. I think there's a lot of not just Nav, but AX and probably just other solutions out there that people start with a partner and something sours and they need a fresh pair of eyes or a fresh approach to really get it out the door for whatever reason. It's an interesting dynamic that comes up quite a bit, and there's quite a few partners in the dynamic space that really. I don't say they build their business on it, but that makes up a decent chunk, I think, of their clients are people who come to them as a second attempt.
Yeah, yeah, and something that Fishman pointed out is that there comes a point at which, once an implementation has gone on too long, people get exhausted, people get annoyed, people get unreceptive. You can't get them on the phone, so you can't
Yeah.
you can't actually implement because the customer has ceased to cooperate. They've had enough. And yeah, I did ask him. I did ask the project manager, who we also interviewed for this, Liz Dobson. Her name is. Did you use the agile approach? Said no, no, it was the classic waterfall approach, which was
Yeah.
here is the chunk, this is the scope.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was almost like building almost like a construction project. Here is the scope, here is the budget, here is the timeline.
Hmm.
Anything that changes, understand that you're going to move all these parameters, but they put a lot of time into figuring out exactly what that scope was to
Hmm.
begin with, stuck to it, and there you were with the 3 months. So
Mm. Okay.
you think software, you think agile, but no, not in this case. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And that does make sense. I mean, if there's a very discrete set of things they know they need to get live, I could see how that would be the best fit. But I think, and then going and iterating later, maybe to bring in, because I think you even mentioned they have more plans to move forward, adding more capabilities. That CRM integration, for example, probably more of the back end operations and capabilities of Nav that aren't quite in place yet, right?
Yeah, yeah, they did say the owner of the company, Martin Dennis, said something about with the CRM implementation, we are using a rocket ship to drive down to the corner store. We know what it can do. We're excited to do those things, but we realized got to kind of put that on hold. Right now, they're just using it for sales and customer contact, but they're very field service oriented business, of course, so they're eager to put that field one product
Uh huh.
into work. And he was saying that say field service, for example, they had to prioritize. Field service is working decently, but it is not their major source of income. Their major source of income is actually distribution of
Uh-huh.
product. So that's all, NAV, financial inventory type of functionality. So there again, their greatest pain was somehow wound up second priority. And but there again, that's their real source of income, their real growth area. So this was a great case of, okay, let's stop here. Let's, take stock, reprioritize. And again, 3 months, I was very impressed. Yeah. Next up was UK police forces use Microsoft Dynamics CRM network visualization to process incident data. This is a bespoke Dynamics CRM based system which uses, again, network visualization for rapid and effective incident response. Here, Microsoft Services UK is heavily involved in the project. And again, it is with two police forces over in UK, and I take it it's very common in the UK for, say, two police forces or more to join forces on an IT project and make it economical and working for all of them. And they use, again, what's called network visualization technology from a company called Cambridge Intelligence. And what that does is Keylines visualization technology more or less gives a dispatcher or an incident responder an idea of where it is, how many officers might be needed on the scene. It can even, I take it, tell who the citizens are and, if self-same citizens are dangerous, for example. Network visualization, that sounds like totally an IT thing, and it is used that way. It is used, for example, on a corporate network to understand where the users are, where the greatest use of this or that product is, but it is also used for, say, disease control, understanding how an outbreak is working in the world, where this disease is traveling. It's also used, I think, in if I recall correctly, during the last election, to more or less take the temperature when you see red state, blue state, all of that. That's a form of network visualization. So again, Microsoft Services UK heavily involved in this, and they realized after an intensive sort of focus group with these two police departments, what that you really need is to be able to visualize this, to respond quickly, make sense of it all in a kind of a dashboard. So this to me was a very impressive case.
Yeah, and I have seen scenarios like this before where CRM itself sort of takes on the role of a unification platform for different data sources. It's not what I would always think of as the best role for CRM, but it's not the first time I've seen it either, and I think it has shown that it can really play that role well, where, I think with enough integration work, you can pull in sort of make CRM the home for a variety of different types of information. I think in this case, there's several sources coming into. I'm just trying to look through, several sources of information that go into CRM, and then the visualization tool Keyline can pull the right information out to create the kind of visualizations that I guess, like you said, the dispatchers or the responders need to give themselves a picture without having to sort of look in the moment and try to make sense of these different things. So it gives them that one picture of the situation they're heading into. I imagine we'll be seeing more of this kind of sort of intelligent assist on, in sort of emergency response situations. I mean, in a sense, it almost ties into what we saw from Stefano Tempesta's work in the emergency response. It's sort of not directly there, but sort of side by side with it. There's this notion of knowing where your people are, and then there's this idea of knowing how to respond in the moment to the scenario that's at hand to provide help. So yeah, some pretty interesting stuff in the sort of, like you said, emergency response and public service kind of space here.
Yeah, and what better than CRM to tell you who the individuals are? So,
Yeah, and to really kind of keep track of those people and those relationships and those links between even people and things. It sounds like there's a little bit of a there's things and devices and sensors and who knows what else that could potentially be brought into CRM in this case.
yeah, when you think of it, there must be some really fun custom fields in this, in
Yeah,
this application.
and interesting integrations.
Last
I
con-
mean, I noted it was 500 core users for the rollout set for the middle of this year. I mean, that's not a tiny implementation. It's not the biggest ever, but for two police forces, that's a pretty sizable number of people.
yeah, yeah. So this will be a fun one to follow up. I take
Yeah,
it
for
it's
sure.
it's sort of half baked or in the middle of
It's in work.
implementation.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay, next up, we've got a pretty compelling interview with Microsoft on digital transformation. This is in the article Summit EMEA 2017 on digital transformation. Microsoft eager to both talk about and listen to Dynamics ERP and CRM customers. This was an interview with Customer Success EMEA Director Dilip Popat, and he explained why 2017 is really a transformative year for both Microsoft and its customers and the channel. And he was talking about Microsoft's presence at Summit EMEA, which is going to be considerable. It's going to be in the at the high level in the keynotes, but very much in the sessions and one-on-ones. And Dilip is going to deliver a session himself. And I think the most compelling comment he made during the interview was concerning digital transformations. I'd asked him, what would you say? You meet somebody on an elevator and he says, hey, you know what, digital transformations. I was told years ago I got to do Six Sigma. I didn't, and I'm fine. I'm getting tired of this stuff. And he said, I would say look at the destruction occurring in various industries and how various sectors have been blindsided. Now that's interesting. And two examples he
Hmm.
pointed to were, of course, Uber and Airbnb, which were two organizations that, because of digital transformation, totally disrupted those market sectors. These companies can start up with practically no assets. They've got no legacy systems and such, and they're function forward. And so you really need to be listening and have your eyes open. So it's not just about the opportunity for greater capabilities on your part, it's being first in line with those capabilities and first in line in your industry to really make that, quantum leap into this next strange who'd have thought of that way to do things. Uber, who'd have thought of that?
I hear what he's saying. I think I would voice a note of caution that in talking to an existing customer, if Microsoft learned or listened to the feedback from the Summit US in what was it, in the fall of 2016, the really strong 365 message is sort of a tricky one to bring to a bunch of existing users. And I'm very interested to see exactly how strong that message is coming from James Phillips, coming from the CRM team leaders like 365 team leaders like Jujar Singh and Angelo Bandlow, and sort of how they gauge the audience and their perspective as they head into some of these and making some of these pitches across this audience. I think it will be interesting to see how well it's received and how strong they come across in talking about these things, whether they focus on the high level vision of digital transformation, or whether they go back to some of the things that Microsoft's been successful with in the past, in the sort of, I think back to some of the old school convergence events where they really spent keynotes focusing on ways that real customers have been successful with some of the new technology, rather than talking about the vision and the changes that they need to make, or if they don't want to fall behind. So is it sort of aspirational or is it practical? So that's one of the things I took away from this. I think how far is Microsoft folks like Dilip, like James Phillips, really going to push these push the vision versus the practicality?
Yeah, yeah. It does strike me here that Microsoft is. I do believe they're listening. I do believe they heard, say, in Summit US, when somebody says, "Hey, I'm on GP. Why are you? Why is this keynote about Dynamics 365?" And I asked Dilip about that, and he said, "Yeah, it is digital transformation is simply the too powerful a message, too strong a message that we cannot ignore that. So it's not that Microsoft is unrepentant, but they are sticking to this idea of transformation.
Hmm.
Whether they hammer Dynamics 365 for that whole hour and a half, it's probably going to be. Yeah, I kind of hope not, but time will tell. Time will tell. Yeah.
I think the other thing they've always got in mind, I mean, these events where there's customers there and along with partners, there's always sort of a bit of a watch your back kind of, tone to them in the sense that they know that when there's a lot of Dynamics customers around, there's probably a lot of competitors watching. There's the Acumaticas and the NetSuites and maybe other competitors I'm not thinking of from the European markets. In this case, I'm sort of watching and seeing, are we is Microsoft doing enough to just make make these customers unhappy that this is the time to swoop in with our sales pitch? And I'm sure Microsoft's got their mind on that too. Without a convergence event, partners really don't have the kind of selling environment that they used to count on that these events sort of provided for prospects. So I think that changes the the calculus a little bit too in terms of what this event really is all about. But I think that's going to be another one of those points that's going to be on people's minds from Microsoft and from the service sector of the dynamic space.
Well, next up were some product and best practices stories, and the first one kind of relates to what we're just talking about. This was the Microsoft Dynamics AX to Dynamics 365 migration, why to start planning now. And this was an interview with Sonata Software's Dynamics AX and 365 technical architect Ajmal Mohammed in anticipation of a webcast coming up. And he described how customers are eager to gain competency or advantage over their competition as part of their digital transformations, and one of those elements for a lot of them is to get to Dynamics 365. They feel that that is simply the forward-leaning product or platform for them, so they feel eager to get on there quickly, and the core operations and the current operations, for example, are, here he was talking about the phases. Pick your core operations, move those first, and then jump into leveraging more of the capabilities within Dynamics 365. So this kind of is in line with that catapult case study as well. Now, Mohammed pointed out that migration tools are in place, and that's not a routinely leverages some of the tools that were delivered with Dynamics through Lifecycle Services, but a partner like Sonata has its own tools that are able to speed that migration. So here the point is make it quick, stick to your core functions, and then once you're there, find out what the other fruits are on the trees.
Mm-hmm,
more or
mm-hmm.
less.
And this, just as a note to people listening, that webcast actually just happened this past week, a couple of days ago. There should be a recording available soon. And a couple of just things I took from it as it relates to the interview you did, Dan, is that there is quite a bit of tooling that goes into making the upgrade process, smooth and manageable to be able to sort of, keep doing business in the new version. And I agree with you. There's a lot of opportunity there once you're there to start taking advantage of new capabilities. Or planning for either retiring old customizations or rethinking them or reimagining them in the new platform. So, but it's not trivial, and I think that's you see that with Sonata as a service provider, and we're going to see that with lots of other partners in the space who have adopted Dynamics 365 as AX shops in the past, trying to guide their users toward who are thinking upgrade or migration to 365 from the traditional AX 2012 or 2009 or even earlier, and so they're in full gear making this case now, Sonata and others, that this is that there are very reasonable ways. I think even in the webcast, Ajmal said that they've upgraded several companies already to 365 from older versions of AX, so it's well underway at this point.
Sure. Next up, Social Selling Assistant among new features in Microsoft Social Engagement 2017 Update 1.1.
Yeah, I don't know. There's too much to really say about this, but good to see that the social engagement product continues to get upgrades, and it does it really in tandem with CRM. So the social selling assistant, obviously ties into Dynamics 365 capabilities, and it's worth continuing to watch because as Microsoft continues to move 365 ahead, it needs these peripheral tools or sort of ancillary tools to keep pace.
Yeah. Next up, Microsoft marks Outlook Mobile 2-year anniversary add-ins for iOS, including Microsoft Dynamics 365. This was where the Dynamics 365 add-in for Outlook is designed to sort of enable quick lookup of Dynamics 365 record of your customer contacts, all within the email client. So that's a pretty compelling use. And it went on to describe too several other add-ins or several other integrations for tools like Nimble, which offers insights into contacts, included in Outlook, Microsoft Translator, which is now up to support for 60 languages. Trello, a collaborative tool for organizing and prioritizing projects. Evernote, which I think a lot of folks out there are familiar with. And one oddball, Giphy, purportedly the world's first and largest GIF search engine. Microsoft tells us you can now use GIFs to congratulate a friend or coworker, wish them a happy birthday, or simply add a touch of your personality without leaving your inbox. So you can essentially goof off far more efficiently than you did before.
You can be that guy in the office who's sending inspirational gifts to your coworkers. Everyone's favorite coworker.
Please don't.
We got to get that one going. I got to figure that one out.
No, it,
Oh boy.
it's hard to be productive to begin.
Someone talk someone into that one.
Yeah, well, okay. Microsoft gets a pass
Maybe it was a technical achievement more than the actual the tool to get that integrated.
great. Oh, good. Anyway, IT channel company broadens Dynamics 365 CRM reach with Minds United deal.
Okay, so IT channel company, people know them in the space probably better by their division QBS Group or Quattro Business Solutions, which operates across a broad range of countries in Europe, primarily Western Europe, but starting to branch out even further. And they began as a real nav specialty shop, so playing sort of the master VAR role originally for nav, small nav partners in Europe, helping, basically playing the role of order management, helping with marketing, and managing the license sales transaction for these partners. They've grown to, they're closing in on 400, I think, affiliates now, and we'll have some more news on them in the next week, I think, not to jump ahead. But by making this investment, they're investing in a shop that develops and helps partners sell CRM-focused capabilities, and whether it's CRM deployments in the cloud and adoption kind of tools or other kinds of sales and marketing productivity tools. I honestly don't know Minds United real well, but I think they have a pretty strong presence in several countries in Europe, maybe other places too. And by doing a deeper partnership with them and I think gaining a financial stake in the company, it's IT channel company or QBS Group's way of sort of trying to sort of plant their flag in the CRM space and make that part of their strategy going forward so that they're not just nav, they're sort of all of Dynamics 365, and they can help their partners sell across ERP and CRM in the Microsoft space, and I guess compete with because they're really up against not just Dynamics partners and ERP competitors, but they're up against the larger cloud solution providers, the larger sort of what do you call them? Distributor software license distributors in the space, and they're coming at it from a unique sort of business solutions first perspective. So yeah, worth a read, and again, not to jump ahead, but we'll have more on them probably in the next week or two.
Great. Let's wrap up with two MVP-related stories. First up, Microsoft updates MVP program with monthly awards and July renewals for all.
Yeah, I think MVPs are pretty happy about this one. Just going to a monthly award process is probably just, I would guess, a little easier to manage because you have more of a steady stream of awards rather than trying to push out a quarter of them on one day every 3 months. A big batch every 3 months, and then one-time renewals. I'm guessing that's just feedback from MVP. So nothing huge there, but it seems to be based on what the MVP community seem to want.
Sure. And then we did a profile, the entrepreneurial spirit and community achievements of CRM MVP Baris Kanlicka.
Yeah, I think entrepreneurial was the point I took away from this profile by Linda Rosenkrantz. Barris, has started businesses in multiple countries now and sort of combines that love of business building with, technical capabilities and interest in being a community member and in working with a product. So it's a pretty interesting combination of passions from him as a professional. So worth a read. He's someone who's done quite a bit and certainly, I would say, lives up to that MVP status.
Sure. Great. Well, next week, let's move on, Jason. What stories do you have coming up?
Well, as I already touched on, I think we will have a little larger look at what QBS Group has been up to. They did make this acquisition, and we check in with them from time to time because they are one of the fastest moving players in the Dynamics space in terms of their growth over the last couple, 3-4 years now. We should also be looking at more of this Azure IoT technology, so I'm looking forward to that. I also want to call out a couple of events we have coming up. Tuesday, February 14th, we have a look at best practices in payment execution for Dynamics GP. That's an event brought to us by Mineral Tree. On Wednesday, February 15th, a look at how to create a Dynamics NAV RDLC invoice report in 15 minutes. That is brought to us by Simplinova. And then we have a look at whether Power BI or another solution, Data Self Analytics, is right for a Dynamics company, and that is brought to us by DataSelf, and that'll be CEO Joni Girardi. And that is it for next week. But so 3 vendor solutions to check out if you're in the Dynamics space.
Great. You mentioned there's going to be more on Azure IoT and machine learning. Stefano Tempesta will be giving us a preview of a session that he'll be delivering at Summit EMEA, and he'll elaborate upon what he wrote this last week on that subject. So can't know enough about this subject, I think. We'll also have a pretty interesting guest column from Akora about NAV upgrade or re-implementation. This is the case for when one makes sense versus the other. And interestingly, they point out that companies often refuse to re-implement because they want to hold on to some old database they're attached to, like an old slide projector. But Akora points out that NAV functionality isn't all you gain. We also gain a modern platform with Office 365 connectivity, with Cortana AI. So that's a pretty interesting use case, I think. And then I'll be publishing an interview with Anantha Ramchandran. He's with Microsoft EMEA, and this is more about Microsoft's case for digital transformations. So those are a few things I got in line for the next week. Why don't we wrap up?
All right. Thanks, Dan. So this has been another MSDW podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to be on the podcast or have feedback, drop us a line. Again, I'm Jason Gumpert. You can reach me by email at jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com.
And I'm Dan Morneau, Assistant Editor. I am at dmaurno@msdynamicsworld.com.
Until next time, we're MS Dynamics World signing off.
You see me roll on and you see me roll with you. I see the road is long, so get on my side. There's a whole lot